Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ma'am Nino. Today we are from Group 2. We'll be presenting about how constructivism see the conflict of Palestine and Israel. Next slide. I will introduce our member first. There are Fasza Alya Putri, and I'm Jafar As-Shodiq, and the last one, Regita Nursecillya. Next slide. And this is our table of content that we will discuss later on. The first one is introduction that consists of what is constructivism, the history of constructivism, the scholars. And second, decision how constructivism become the in theory, constructive constructor of constructivism, social theory and state behavior, and the last one, critical in constructivism. And three, case study. Brief history why the conflict can happen. How constructivism sees the conflict. Uh, and the last one, conclusion. Next slide.
Okay, so the first one is what is constructivism? Constructivism is a perspective that sees social and historical aspects as the primary key in determining a society in a state, because constructivists believe that state and non-actor state play a huge role in constructing a civilization time by time. In other words, constructivism prioritizes intangible elements such as norms and ideas in constructing a society. And then constructivism believes that there is a strong relationship between social and political theory, and the same can be applied to social theory for politics. Therefore, the international system that we have today is the result of social construction that is formed between countries, because the social contraction itself is the result of thinking in which the socio-political environment and humans interact to make socio-political change. And the last point is constructivism also defines the international relations field as more varied and dynamic. Next slide, please. Okay, so the history of constructivism. First, constructivism only entered the realm of international relations around the end of Cold War, namely in the late 80s and early 90s after the Cold War. International relations were dominated by rationalist theories. And then second, constructivism offered new perspective that put the focus more on the social, ideational, and intersubjective character of global politics. Unlike rationalists, they believe that international relations are shaped by rational choices made by actors when they want to achieve their interests. Compared to the material aspect, like the rationalist thing, constructivism believed that the most important aspect of international relations is the social aspects, and the hope of critical theories that the theory could be applied to any model challenged by the way the new global system appeared to operate. And third is this theory also offers a convincing explanation on why states act depending on their people's character. Neorealism and neoliberalism had failed to anticipate the end of the Cold War, and because of this failure of both theories, constructivism was created, with its exponent in raising essential questions about international relations. In fact, the rationalists who were unable to understand and evaluate the new global system were replaced by these new theories. Despite the lack of mainstream rationalist theory of international politics, the new constructivists enthusiastically improve their concepts and start debates using their methodology. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the main actors in constructivism. The first one there is Nicholas Onuf. He was the first theorist to over constructivism as a theory of international relations. He explains this problem stating that the social world is made by us. It means that constructivism is found on the idea that society and individuals create on one another through a continuous reciprocal process. Onuf also asserts that constructivism applies to all fields of social inquiry and has the capacity to connect disparate issues at first glance. And then there's Alexander Wen. He emphasized that the nations play an important role as the primary players concerning the nature of international relations in his well-known article, Anarchy is what states made, which means anarchy is very different depending on the meaning given by actors. Next slide, please. And then the last one is Friedrich Rathouil. He argues that norms influence all human behavior, turning out to be more clearly constructivist. He also adopts the notion of rationalist by not including an intriguing question about the end sought from his analysis. So, in result, he is denying the standard nature of politics, viewing political activity as meaningful and not merely instrumental. Krathwohl hopes to return the political component to IR theory. He also argues that if an intersubjectively shared context can be assigned to an action, then the action has meaning. Next slide, please. Okay, and then how constructivism became theory in IR. First, constructivism has the belief that structures that unite human beings are determined by shared ideas rather than material forces. Such belief represents the idealist perspective that once dominated the discipline of IR before World War II in influencing the political process. This is due to transformation of actors in IR studies from those emphasizing on the state to those emphasizing on the codification of morality and international rules, and then emphasizing on local and global social movements. And then second, when constructivism released IR from domination of agency, determinism like traditional realism, the opportunity to further expand the scope and unit of analysis of IR studies is even greater. As already mentioned, these transformations open up new spaces for IR studies, including new actors in IR, as stated by Melissa Anthony. He stated that constructivism especially allow us to identify non-state actors as the agents who bring them ideas that are critical in shaping state policies. Constructivism also alert us to perceptible changes in attitude and approaches within and among states that may be taking place as ideas find their way into concrete policies. These ideas add to the dynamic as the state actors, and to a certain extent, non-state actors engage in the process that brings about intersubjective understanding on how interstate relations should be. And the last one, thus, constructivism has made an important contribution to the development of IR studies, especially in terms of opening up the possibility of expanding discussion on actors in IR studies, which no longer have to be dominated by international institutions and the state, and those who research on IR have more option for discussing new themes that can fall within the scope of IR. Next slide, please.
So this is the structure of constructivism. Constructivity and structure are mutually exclusive, implying that agency influences structure. Agency can be understood as a person's ability to act, while structure refers to the international system consisting of material and ideational elements. This attitude is very different from that of realists. who argued that the anarchic structure of the international system determines the behavior of states. And the next is social theory in constructivism. Another central issue of constructivism is identity and importance. Constructivists argue that the states can have multiple identities. They are socially constructed through interaction with other actors. Identities is a representation of actors' understanding of who they are, which in turn indicates their interests. They are important to constructivists because they argue that identity is both interest and action. But it should be noted that the action of a country must be in harmony with its identity. Thus, a country cannot act against its identity because this will question the validity of its identity, including its preference. States can conform to a certain identity or expect to comply with the rules they are associated with their actions. This identity creates the expectation that some kinds of behavior and action are more acceptable than others. This process is also known as the logic of appropriateness, where actors behave in certain ways because they believe that this behavior is appropriate. And this is the critics in constructivism. Conventional constructivists ask what type questions like what caused an actor to act. They believe it is impossible to explain the world in causal terms and are interested in discovering the relationship between actors, social norms, interests, and identities. Conventional constructivists assume, for example, that actors act according to their identities and make it possible to predict when these identities become visible. When an identity appears to be changing, conventional constructivists investigate what factors cause expect of a nation's identity to change. On the other hand, critical constructivists ask how type questions, such as how actors come to believe in particular identities. Contrary to conventional constructivists, they are not interested in these identity effects. In contrast, critical constructivists want to reconstruct the identity. That is, find out what its parts are, which they believe to be created through written or spoken communication between and among people. And we're gonna explain about the case study, and this is a short brief history about Palestine and Israel conflict. The conflict between Palestine and Israel has been going on since the early 1900s, when most Arab and Muslim terrorists were still part of the Ottoman Empire. After World War I, Britain received a mandate from the League of Nations to help establish a state for Jewish people in the region. Hundreds of thousands Jews also moved to the region as the Zionist movement. Zionism for the Jews is an attempt to escape persecution. Large number of Middle Eastern Jews also moved to Israel, either to escape anti-Semitic violence or because they were forcibly expelled. Communal violence between Jews and Arabs in Palestine is getting out of hand. In 1947, the United Nations approved a plan to divide Palestine into two territories, namely for the Jews called Israel and the Arab called Palestine. And this is why does the conflict happen. Meanwhile, Jerusalem, a holy city for Jews and Muslims, is a special international zone. Unfortunately, the plan never materialized. Directional leaders in the region regard the plan as European colonial and invasion of Palestine. The Israeli force that won the 1948 war claimed land beyond the limits set by the United Nations. As a result, Israel occupies land that has become part of Palestine, including the western part of Jerusalem. Israel also uprooted and expelled the entire Palestinian nation. As a result, about 700,000 Palestinians were displaced. His descendants now reach 7 million people and are still considered refugees. The 1948 war ended with Israel controlling all the territory currently marked on the map as Israel, except for the West Bank of Gaza, from which most Palestinians feel and are now considered Palestinian terrorists. In addition, many Palestinians are in refugee camps in neighboring countries. Now, several things are still being debated and contested, such as the border between Palestine and Israel, Palestinian refugee status, and Jerusalem status. The leading dimension of the first conflict between Palestine and Israel began in 1948, and the second conflict between Palestine and Israel began in 1967 when Israel placed the two Palestinian territories under military occupation. Palestine and Israel conflict because the two countries want to build a country on the same land. Geographically, the area that the two countries want to fight for is the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Then the area of the region was labeled on the map. In the area, there is the city of Jerusalem, which is considered sacred to Palestinian Arab and Israeli Jews. This conflict creates much overlap. Israel makes Palestinians suffer, and many people receive terror from the Israel military. Moreover, both have justification about what and why the conflict has occurred more than 70 years. Therefore, peace between the two countries is complicated. The peace process has been going on for decades. However, since the 1993 and the 1995 Oslo Accords, there has been no way of peace between Palestine and Israel. Jewish leaders accept the United Nations plan for a Palestinian state which want to make Palestine Jewish. However, the Palestinians were against it, especially the people or figures who had opposed British interests in the region for decades. In 1949, British withdrew from Palestine and Israel declared that Israel was an independent country. Not only was Palestine against this action, but Arab countries also opposed this happening. The incident occurred in 1948. Many Palestinian Arab fled or some were expelled. Israel also controlled many areas from former British rule, including Jerusalem. However, Jordan controlled the West Bank of Egypt controlled Gaza. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel captured the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. Then the Golan Heights from Syria and the West Bank and East Jerusalem for Jordan, which became the reason for Arab aggression on its borders. Israel also offered the Arabs the return of their territory they had control in the exchange for the Arabs recognizing Israel's right to live and providing guarantees against future attacks. However, the offer was not accepted by the Arabs' full diplomatic recognition of Israel. Okay, next.
Okay, thank you, Rere. In this slide is how does constructivism see this conflict? In order to understand the conflict better, constructivism offers three primary ontological ideas that emphasize the significance of the additional or normative and material constructor. One, it focuses on the agents and structure that mutually constitute its constitutional interest and action. These are related to a community identity such as religion, ethnic, and culture. Second is use first kind of scientific method that use many ways to deal with the subject, which usually use interpretative approach in constructivism study. And the last one, it emphasizes the importance of social construction of interests and action, which mean this theory refers to clearly the aim of the structure of dominant. Constructivism is focused on the interpretation of social reality, so it makes the state the main object in the analysis. As we can see from the preface explained, we can conclude that the major problem in this conflict is the social identity that creates discrimination one community does to another community, which is considered as intimidating other that cause a threat that creates street boundaries between communities. Therefore, the Jewish refuge feel treaty by the Palestinian entity that spread broadly, and this entity plays a massive role for Palestine because there are boundaries and across boundaries conflict are constructed in their social construction based on their national norms and identity. Therefore, most of the conflict between Israel are most cross-ethnic identity problem. Next slide. Okay, before we discuss the conflict more, we must understand the social reality from the perspective of the social actor because constructivism grabs the middle ground that interests in understanding the that is understanding the interaction between subjective, intersubjective, and material in social construction. This approach explains the factor of the Israel-Palestine conflict because the social environment creates diversity based on people's social identities. Today, the people living in the land of Israel are considered Jewish, but Jewish law defines a Jew as someone born into a Jewish family or convert to Judaism, and the term of Hebrew refers to a person associated with the ancient kingdom of Israel in concentrate. Jews were known to be ethno-religious and they may have chosen to convert to Judaism rather than be Judaism by birth. Constructivism also analyzes the holistic ways political preference and represent the material and social words based on the independent identity of Palestine, Jewish, Zionists, and Arabs. This decentricity city allow human actors such as political group and leader to actively value activity relate to language, to ethnic, and etc., which seek to give meaning to social conflict in the world in general. The elite took advantage of the ravaged belief of the Jewish community that emphasizes the importance of the Messianic land and its tradition. The presence of Jewish immigration and the emergence of Palestinian identity due to the associated tree played a significant role in the birthday of the Palestine conflict. Such an influence and dominance of the West affect the activity of Arab as well according to scholars, ethnic and religion are two different aspects because of its social environment. Despite this, the Jewish identity play a significant role bonding religion and land in personal conflict. Their social environment was more than 30,000 years 30,000 years before Western culture and religion emerged. These people now referred to as Jews were a subject of anarchy and slavery as well as theoretical Daniel Boyarin. The idea of Jewishness is very connected to identity because being Jewish is not some of the Jewish leader made progress in social circles and made a lasting impression on the people identity while the complication of the nation was seen. The existence of the Palestinian natives in Palestine and their national identity were threatened due to Jewish immigration and identity is a crucial issue given the conflict. The Israel-Palestinian and Arab conflict are the most rationalist because there is cruel avoidance of identity threat to this philosophy. The constructivism theory addressed to dominant model Palestine Arabs see the growing Jewish population and their dominance in Palestine as a significant threat to their identity and race. Within this framework of understanding and inclusion, religion, ethnic, and cultural diversity and the resolution of difference can be addressed in 1948. Israel finally became a nation because the subject debate these laws of Palestine is a reminder of the glory the Arabs had in Arab nation belief they have failed to serve their fellow human, the Palestinian Arab. This has led to the emergence of propaganda preferring and district Palestinian identity explains the emergence of identity recognition conflict. Next slide, please. Okay, conclusion. Constructivism emphasizes combining the understanding and method of political subject in connecting the symbolism that structure and material and social world. As such, they typically constitute the characteristic attitude and interests of political actor. Constructivism focuses on the difference between people and how these associations are constructed using shared social institutions. A full understanding of conflict phenomenon requires an analysis of interethnic, intercultural, and intercommunal disparities. Otherwise, alternative may lead to futility, may agreement and treaty were signed and terms were set by international package for using a constructivism approach, but all their efforts were in vain. The current and past situation of Israel and Palestine, including their action, are important in consideration as judged by constructivism strategies of conflict resolution, and the fact that opposing parties can come together and each party can understand the voice of the other is crucial to the resolution of the conflict. And culture Israel and Palestine share a common destiny. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is reference from us. That's all from us. We apologize as deeper greeting. Thank you for your attention.